The first drops of rain struck the windshield just as Marcus Whitaker turned onto Willow Creek Drive in the quiet Virginia suburb he had called home for nearly 12 years. The evening sky glowed orange beyond the trees, and church bells echoed faintly from downtown. It should have been an ordinary Sunday. Instead, it became the beginning of a night that would change countless lives. Marcus, 54 years old, sat behind the wheel of a dark blue Lincoln sedan. His broad shoulders filled the driver's seat. Years of discipline showed in every movement. Beside him sat his wife, Danielle Whitaker, a respected civil rights attorney. Soft gospel music played through the speakers while she reviewed legal notes on her phone. They were returning from a community leadership banquet in Richmond. Marcus adjusted his charcoal suit jacket and glanced at the familiar neighborhood. Children rode bicycles along sidewalks. American flags fluttered from front porches. Warm lights glowed through windows of tidy homes. It looked like the kind of place where everyone felt safe. Marcus knew appearances could be deceiving. Throughout his life, he had learned that respectability did not always protect dignity. Professional success did not always prevent suspicion. He had spent decades navigating rooms where assumptions arrived before introductions. Even after achieving remarkable accomplishments, he still recognized certain looks, certain pauses, certain judgments. As the Lincoln rolled through the neighborhood at the posted speed limit, a police cruiser emerged from a side street behind them. Marcus noticed it in his mirror, but thought little of it. Police cars frequently patrolled the area. The cruiser remained behind them through one intersection, then another, then another. Danielle eventually looked up from her phone. "That officer has been following us for several blocks," she said quietly. Marcus nodded without concern, probably heading the same direction. But the cruiser stayed behind them, 4 blocks past, then flashing red and blue lights suddenly illuminated the evening sky. Marcus felt a familiar heaviness settle into his chest. Not fear, not panic, something older than either emotion, something born from experience. He signaled immediately and pulled calmly to the curb. Officer Brent Callahan stepped from the patrol vehicle. 41 years old and physically imposing, he approached with deliberate confidence. One hand rested near his duty belt. His expression revealed neither urgency nor courtesy. The window lowered. "License and registration," Callahan said. No greeting, no explanation. Marcus kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. "Good evening, officer," he replied evenly. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" The officer's jaw tightened. "License and registration. Now." Danielle slowly lowered her phone. Marcus remained composed. "I'd be happy to provide them. I'd simply like to understand the reason for the stop." The officer leaned closer. "You want to make this difficult?" Marcus exchanged a brief glance with his wife. Neither needed words. Both recognized the direction this interaction was heading. Carefully, Marcus began reaching toward the inside pocket of his jacket, where he carried his wallet and a small leather credential holder he never traveled without. Before his hand reached the pocket, the officer suddenly stepped backward. "Hands where I can see them." The command exploded across the quiet street. Marcus froze instantly. Danielle inhaled sharply. "Officer," Marcus said calmly, "I am retrieving the identification you requested." The officer's hand settled firmly on his holster. Several houses away, porch lights flickered on as curious neighbors noticed the commotion. The rain began falling harder, and for the first time that evening, Marcus realized this stop was never about a traffic violation. Across the street, someone stepped onto a front porch and quietly raised a cell phone camera toward the flashing lights. Officer Brent Callahan stared through the rain at Marcus Whitaker as though he had already reached a verdict. The flashing lights reflected across wet pavement and neighborhood windows. Several residents had gathered beneath covered porches, watching silently. Cell phones were beginning to appear. Marcus remained motionless, with both hands visible. Years of experience had taught him an uncomfortable truth. During moments like this, surviving the encounter often depended less on rights than on perception. Every movement could be misunderstood. Every word could be twisted. Every reaction carried consequences. "Step out of the vehicle," Callahan ordered. "Officer, am I being detained?" Marcus asked. "Step out now." Danielle sat perfectly still. Her eyes never left the officer. She had represented clients who described encounters exactly like this one. Ordinary citizens transformed into suspects without explanation. Constitutional protections suddenly replaced by assumptions. The stories always sounded unbelievable until they happened directly in front of you. Marcus slowly opened the door and stepped into the rain. At 6 feet 3 inches tall, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he stood with quiet confidence. He offered no resistance, no argument, no hostility. The officer seemed irritated by the lack of conflict. A second police cruiser arrived moments later. Sergeant Dale Morrison emerged from the passenger side, while a younger officer, Emma Sutton, stepped from the driver's seat. The flashing lights multiplied, painting the neighborhood in red and blue. Morrison approached Callahan. "What's happening?" "Suspicious vehicle," Callahan answered. "Drivers being difficult." Emma glanced toward Marcus. Nothing about him appeared threatening. His posture remained calm. His wife still sat inside the vehicle. Everything about the scene felt wrong. "Hands on the hood," Callahan ordered. Marcus complied immediately. Rainwater streamed across the polished surface of the Lincoln as he placed both hands flat against it. The search that followed was unnecessarily rough. Callahan checked pockets, tugged at clothing, and treated compliance as though it were resistance. Finally, he removed Marcus's wallet and a small leather credential holder from the inside jacket pocket. The credential holder caught Emma Sutton's attention. It looked official, professional, important. Callahan glanced at it briefly. Then he tossed it onto the hood beside the wallet without opening it. Emma frowned. Something about that decision bothered her, deeply. "You match the description of a suspect connected to vehicle thefts," Callahan announced. Marcus turned his head slightly. "What description?" "Black male, dark sedan." The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain. Marcus spoke carefully. "Officer, that is not a suspect description. That is a broad category of people." Callahan's face hardened. Danielle stepped from the vehicle. "Officer, I am an attorney," she said firmly. "My husband has complied with every instruction. Please articulate your reasonable suspicion or release him immediately." Morrison stepped between them. "Ma'am, return to the vehicle." "No, not until someone explains why my husband is being treated like a criminal." Emma shifted uneasily. She looked at Marcus, then at the untouched credential holder, then at Callahan. A growing knot formed in her stomach. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "maybe we should verify his identification first." Morrison barely glanced toward her. "Callahan has it handled." 3 simple words, yet Emma immediately understood their meaning. Stay quiet, don't interfere, fall in line. Callahan reached for his handcuffs. The metallic click echoed through the neighborhood. Danielle's face tightened. Marcus remained composed. "Officer," he said calmly, "I strongly encourage you to reconsider your next decision. Is that a threat?" "No, it's advice." The handcuffs closed around Marcus's wrists. Several neighbors began openly recording. One elderly veteran standing beneath a porch roof shook his head in disbelief. A mother walking her dog stopped completely. Children watched from behind screen doors. The rain continued falling, and resting only inches away on the hood of the car sat the unopened leather credential holder containing information that could end this entire encounter. No one in authority bothered to look inside. The ride to the Sycamore Falls Police Department lasted less than 10 minutes. For Marcus Whitaker, it felt much longer. Rain tapped steadily against the cruiser windows while streetlights blurred into golden streaks across the glass. His hands remained cuffed behind his back. The metal pressed against his wrists with every turn. Yet Marcus sat perfectly still. He had spent most of his adult life studying human behavior. He understood pride, fear, authority. In many ways, this situation was no longer about him. It had become a test of everyone else in the system. Behind the cruiser, Danielle followed in the Lincoln. She never lost sight of the flashing lights. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Anger moved through her like electricity, but years in courtrooms had taught her discipline. Emotional reactions rarely won important battles. Documentation did, facts did, patience did. At the station, Marcus was escorted through a side entrance used for detainees. The building smelled of stale coffee, printer toner, and industrial cleaning products. Fluorescent lights cast a cold glow across beige walls. Officer Callahan seemed energized. The confidence that had briefly wavered on the roadside had returned. This was his environment, his territory, his rules. Marcus was led toward booking. "Name?" asked the processing officer. "Marcus Raymond Whitaker." "Date of birth?" Marcus answered every question calmly. No resistance, no complaints, no arguments. The fingerprints came next, then photographs, front view, side view. The camera flash reflected off his suit jacket. Nearby, Emma Sutton stood quietly observing. The longer the process continued, the worse she felt. Nothing about Marcus resembled a criminal suspect. Nothing about the stop matched her training. Nothing about the report Callahan was preparing felt truthful. Across town, Danielle parked outside the station and entered through the front doors. The desk officer looked up. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes," Danielle replied. "I'd like to speak with your watch commander immediately." The officer offered the standard response. "He's unavailable at the moment." Danielle set her briefcase on a chair. "Then I suggest he become available." Something in her voice caused the officer to pause. She wasn't loud, she wasn't emotional. She sounded certain. The kind of certainty that usually belongs to people holding very strong cards. Back in booking, the processing officer entered Marcus's information into the department computer. Then something unexpected happened. The officer stopped typing. His eyes narrowed. He read the screen again. Then a third time. Marcus noticed the change immediately. Years on the federal bench had made him an expert observer. The officer's posture shifted. His breathing changed. Confusion became surprise. Surprise became concern. The officer looked directly at Marcus, then quickly looked away. He resumed typing without saying a word, but his hands moved much faster now. Meanwhile, in the station break room, Callahan sat comfortably drinking coffee. Sergeant Morrison reviewed paperwork nearby. The incident already felt finished to them. Routine. Forgettable. Callahan began writing his report. Observed suspicious vehicle. Driver displayed unusual behavior. Driver became confrontational. Each sentence moved farther from the truth. Yet Callahan wrote confidently. Experience had taught him that paperwork often mattered more than reality. Reality could be challenged. Official reports became records, and records survived. Across the room, Morrison signed preliminary approval without asking difficult questions. Outside, the rain intensified. Inside the station, Marcus was escorted to a holding cell. The heavy door closed behind him. He sat calmly on the metal bench, hands folded, back straight, patient, not because he trusted the system, because he understood exactly how the system was supposed to work. At precisely 7:18 p.m., Danielle stepped away from the lobby chairs and made a phone call. The conversation lasted less than 1 minute. Her words were brief, professional, precise. When the call ended, she returned to her seat. Then she waited. The desk officer watched her curiously. He had no idea that a chain of events had just begun moving through Washington, Richmond, and several federal offices simultaneously. Within the next hour, the entire foundation beneath the Sycamore Falls Police Department was about to start shaking. At 7:56 p.m., the front desk phone rang. The sound barely attracted attention. Sunday evenings were usually quiet in Sycamore Falls. Most calls involved noise complaints, parking disputes, or lost pets. The desk officer answered casually while organizing paperwork. "Sycamore Falls Police Department. How may I help you?" The voice on the other end immediately changed the atmosphere. It was calm, authoritative, unmistakably official. "This is Deputy Director Randall Pierce from the United States Judicial Security Division. I need immediate confirmation regarding the detention status of Marcus Raymond Whitaker." The desk officer froze. His eyes drifted toward the holding area. "May I ask who is calling again, sir?" "You may, but I suggest you locate your commanding officer first. Time is becoming important." The desk officer swallowed. Something about the voice made his stomach tighten. He placed the caller on hold and hurried toward the break room. Meanwhile, Danielle remained seated in the lobby. She watched everything, every movement, every expression, every shift in posture. Years of trial work had taught her that truth often appeared before words did. The desk officer pushed open the break room door. Callahan looked up from his coffee. "What?" "Sir, there's a federal official on the phone asking about your detainee." Morrison frowned. "Federal official?" "Yes, sir. He says it's urgent." For the first time that evening, uncertainty entered the room. Callahan sat forward. "Who exactly is he asking about?" "Marcus Whitaker." The room fell silent. Morrison stood immediately. A few minutes later, he picked up the call. The conversation lasted less than 90 seconds. When it ended, the color had drained from his face. Callahan noticed instantly. "What's wrong?" Morrison didn't answer right away. He simply stared at him. Then he spoke. "Tell me you verified his credentials." Callahan blinked. "What credentials?" Morrison's expression collapsed. "The credentials in the leather holder." "I didn't look at them." The silence that followed felt endless. "You didn't look at them?" "No." Morrison rubbed both hands across his face. The panic was becoming visible now. "Marcus Whitaker isn't some random citizen." Callahan stared back, confused, defensive, annoyed. "Then who is he?" Morrison exhaled heavily. "He's Chief Judge Marcus Whitaker of the United States Court of Appeals." The words landed like a detonation. Callahan's confidence vanished instantly. For several seconds, he genuinely believed he had heard wrong. Chief Judge, Federal Court. The titles didn't seem possible. Not after everything that had happened. Not after the handcuffs, not after the report, not after the holding cell. Across the station, Emma Sutton watched the realization spread through the building. Officers who had been chatting casually moments earlier suddenly became very busy. Phones started ringing, doors opened and closed. Whispers traveled through hallways. The atmosphere transformed from routine confidence into controlled panic. Morrison walked quickly toward the holding area. His shoes echoed against the floor. When he reached the cell, he stopped. Marcus remained exactly where they had left him. Back straight, hands folded, calm, patient, waiting. The same composure he had shown from the beginning. Morrison unlocked the door. "Judge Whitaker, Marcus slowly stood. The fluorescent lights reflected softly from his glasses. "Yes, Sergeant?" The title struck Morrison harder than any accusation could have. Not anger, not outrage, just dignity, the kind that exposes failures without raising its voice. "Sir, we're arranging your immediate release." Marcus looked at him quietly. "I assumed you eventually would." Minutes later, his personal belongings were returned. Wallet, phone, watch. Then finally the leather credential holder. Marcus opened it himself. Inside rested official federal judicial identification, the very item that could have prevented everything. The item Callahan never bothered to examine. Marcus closed the holder carefully and slipped it back into his jacket. At the far end of the corridor, Callahan stood frozen. For the first time all night, he had no command to give, no authority to exercise, no explanation to offer. And as Marcus Whitaker began walking toward the lobby where Danielle waited, every person in that station slowly realized the same thing. The real consequences of this night had not begun yet. Danielle Whitaker rose from her chair the moment Marcus entered the lobby. For a brief second, neither spoke. They simply looked at one another. Relief was there. So was anger. But beneath both emotions existed something deeper. Exhaustion. The kind that comes from surviving a battle you never should have been forced to fight. Marcus adjusted his jacket. "Ready to go home?" Danielle asked softly. "Not yet," he replied. She understood immediately. This night was no longer about getting home. It was about what happened next. Behind them, Chief Raymond Aldridge hurried into the lobby after receiving multiple emergency calls from city officials. The department chief was a veteran law enforcement officer with nearly 3 decades of service. He had managed scandals before. Budget crises, public controversies, personnel disputes. But as he entered the lobby and recognized Marcus Whitaker standing beside his attorney wife, he realized this situation belonged to an entirely different category. "Judge Whitaker," Aldridge began carefully. Marcus turned toward him. "Chief, I would like to personally apologize for tonight's events." Marcus studied him for several seconds. "Do you know why I was stopped?" Aldridge hesitated. "No, sir. Neither do I." The chief lowered his eyes. That answer said more than a lengthy speech ever could. Across the room, Callahan remained near the hallway entrance. Nobody was speaking to him anymore. Nobody was defending him. The confidence that had fueled him throughout the evening had evaporated. For the first time, he was confronting something unfamiliar. Accountability. Marcus turned toward the chief. "I am not interested in public relations statements. I'm interested in facts. I want every recording preserved." Every report secured, every communication archived, immediately. "It will be done," Aldridge replied. "Good." Danielle opened her briefcase. She removed several documents and handed them to the chief. Formal preservation notices, requests for evidence retention, notifications regarding potential civil rights violations. Prepared with remarkable speed. The chief accepted them quietly. Outside, the storm continued rolling across Virginia. But another storm was already gathering online. The neighbor's cell phone video had spread rapidly across social media platforms. Thousands of people were sharing clips showing Marcus standing peacefully beside his vehicle while officers escalated the encounter. The comments multiplied every minute. Questions became outrage. Outrage became national attention. By midnight, local news stations throughout Virginia were broadcasting the footage. By dawn, national networks had picked up the story. Inside his home, Pastor Leonard Brooks watched the coverage while drinking coffee before sunrise. For years, he had warned city leaders about troubling patterns within the police department. Complaints disappeared. Investigations stalled. Discipline rarely occurred. Most residents stopped expecting change. Now the entire country was paying attention. Meanwhile, Emma Sutton sat alone in her apartment. Sleep refused to come. The body camera footage replayed endlessly in her mind. Every command, every decision, every missed opportunity. She remembered suggesting that they verify Marcus's identification. She remembered being ignored. Most of all, she remembered remaining silent afterward. The realization weighed heavily. Doing nothing had not made her neutral. It had made her part of the outcome. Around 2 a.m., Emma opened her laptop. She began writing. A statement, a complete account of everything she witnessed. No omissions, no excuses, no protection for anyone. Across town, Marcus and Danielle finally returned home. Their large brick house sat quietly beneath the rain. The neighborhood was asleep. The world seemed calm again. Yet neither of them went inside immediately. They remained seated in the parked car. Neither spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Danielle reached across the center console and took Marcus's hand. "You did everything right," she whispered. Marcus stared through the windshield. "That's what troubles me most." He thought about the credential holder, the federal title, the phone calls, the resources available to him. Then he thought about people who possessed none of those protections, people whose names never appeared on television, people whose stories ended quietly, people who were never believed. As dawn approached, Marcus made a decision. He would not allow this case to become only about him, and that decision would soon place the entire city of Sycamore Falls under a spotlight it could no longer escape. By sunrise, Sycamore Falls was no longer an anonymous suburban town. News vans lined the streets outside City Hall. Satellite trucks occupied parking lots. Reporters stood beneath umbrellas, delivering live updates to audiences across the country. The story had become impossible to ignore. A respected federal appellate judge had been stopped, searched, handcuffed, and jailed despite committing no crime. And there was video. Hours of it. Every command, every decision, every mistake. Chief Raymond Aldridge arrived at headquarters before 6 in the morning. He carried a stack of newspapers under one arm. Every front page featured the same story. Different headlines, same images. Marcus Whitaker standing calmly beside his vehicle. Officer Brent Callahan placing him in handcuffs. A city confronting questions it could no longer avoid. Inside the department conference room, Aldridge assembled his command staff. Nobody looked comfortable. Nobody looked surprised. That troubled him most. The room contained too many people who seemed familiar with the problem. "I want every document preserved," Aldridge ordered. "Every complaint, every disciplinary record, every use of force report from the past 5 years." Several commanders exchanged nervous glances. Aldridge noticed. His frustration grew. The deeper he looked, the more convinced he became that the traffic stop represented something larger. Not one mistake, a pattern. At 9 o'clock, Deputy Internal Affairs Director Carolyn Marsh officially opened an independent investigation. Marsh possessed a reputation throughout Virginia law enforcement circles. She was thorough, uncompromising, and impossible to intimidate. When she entered the department, conversation stopped. People knew what her presence meant. Someone was finally asking difficult questions. Her first request involved body camera footage. Every second. Unedited, complete. She watched the entire encounter 3 times. The first viewing left her concerned. The second left her disturbed. The third left her angry. There was no traffic violation, no suspicious behavior, no legitimate justification. The escalation came entirely from one direction. Meanwhile, Emma Sutton arrived carrying a folder. Inside were handwritten notes documenting everything she remembered. Her hands trembled slightly, not because she feared punishment, because she feared remaining silent. Marsh welcomed her into a private office. "Tell me what happened, she said. Emma did, for nearly 2 hours. Nothing omitted, nothing softened. She described Callahan's behavior, Morrison's unwillingness to intervene, the ignored credential holder, the discomfort she felt from the beginning. When the interview ended, Marsh leaned back thoughtfully. "Why come forward now?" Emma looked toward the window. Rain clouds still covered the sky. "Because I kept telling myself somebody else would do the right thing." She paused. Nobody did. Across town, Pastor Leonard Brooks held a community meeting at New Hope Baptist Church. The sanctuary filled beyond capacity. Teachers attended, veterans attended, business owners attended, retired officers attended. Black families, white families, young professionals, senior citizens. The crowd reflected the entire community. One by one, residents stood and shared experiences, traffic stops, dismissed complaints, humiliating encounters. Stories previously whispered now entered public record. Reporters filled notebooks. Cameras captured every testimony. The silence surrounding the department began cracking apart. That afternoon, Marsh reviewed Callahan's personnel file. 2 prior complaints involving racial profiling. Multiple allegations of unnecessary escalation. Several informal warnings from supervisors. No meaningful discipline. The pattern became impossible to miss. Then she opened another file. Sergeant Dale Morrison. A different problem emerged. Repeated failures to intervene. Repeated approvals of questionable reports. Repeated decisions to protect officers rather than investigate them. Marsh slowly closed both folders. The issue extended beyond one patrol officer. The system itself had enabled the behavior. Late that evening, she submitted a preliminary report to Chief Aldridge. The findings were devastating, but buried near the end of the document sat a discovery even more alarming. Evidence suggested several previous investigations had been intentionally minimized, and if that finding proved true, the scandal threatening Sycamore Falls was about to become much larger than a single traffic stop. 3 days after Marcus Whitaker's arrest, Sycamore Falls found itself at the center of a national conversation. Television crews crowded outside government buildings. Editorials appeared in major newspapers. Civil rights organizations requested records. State officials demanded answers. The town that once prided itself on avoiding attention suddenly found itself unable to escape it. Inside Internal Affairs headquarters, Carolyn Marsh continued digging. What she discovered disturbed even her. The original traffic stop was serious. The larger pattern emerging beneath it was far worse. Over the previous 4 years, complaints against several officers had followed nearly identical paths. Citizens reported aggressive stops. Supervisors reviewed the incidents. Investigations concluded no wrongdoing occurred. Cases closed. Files archived. Nothing changed. Marsh compared body camera footage from older incidents with written reports. Again and again, discrepancies appeared. Descriptions exaggerated. Civilian behavior mischaracterized. Officer conduct minimized. The similarities became impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Someone had built a culture where accountability existed mostly on paper. Meanwhile, Brent Callahan spent his days inside a small attorney's office in Richmond. The confidence that once defined him had vanished. News channels replayed footage repeatedly. Neighbors recognized him. Former supporters avoided him. His phone barely rang anymore. For years, he had viewed himself as a good officer. Tough, aggressive, effective. Now he faced a reality he had never seriously considered. What if everyone else had been right? The question haunted him. But pride made acceptance difficult. Across town, Marcus returned to work. His courtroom remained as orderly as ever. Attorneys argued motions, witnesses testified, cases proceeded, yet something had changed, not in his behavior, in how people looked at him. Some offered sympathy, others expressed outrage, many simply thanked him. A young public defender approached after one hearing. "My father experienced something similar years ago," she said quietly. "Nobody listened then. Maybe they'll listen now." Marcus thanked her. The conversation stayed with him all day. That evening, he met with Danielle on their back porch. The storm had finally passed. Warm summer air drifted through the neighborhood. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. For the first time all week, things felt peaceful. "They're treating you like a symbol," Danielle said. Marcus nodded. "I know." "Does that bother you?" He considered the question carefully. Sometimes. He stared into the fading sunset. But if being a symbol helps people who were ignored before, maybe that's not entirely bad. Danielle smiled softly. That answer sounded exactly like the man she married. The next morning brought another surprise. Emma Sutton publicly testified before the city council. The hearing attracted hundreds of residents, every seat filled. Additional spectators stood along walls. Television cameras broadcast everything live. Emma walked to the microphone alone. No attorney, no prepared speech, only honesty. She described what she witnessed during the traffic stop. Then she described something harder, her own silence. "I knew something felt wrong," she admitted. The room remained completely still. "I told myself it wasn't my place to challenge senior officers. I told myself someone else would step in. Nobody did." She paused. Emotion briefly entered her voice. Silence protects problems. It doesn't solve them. The statement spread nationally within hours. Many praised her courage, others criticized her delay. Emma accepted both reactions. She believed she deserved them. Late that afternoon, Carolyn Marsh received a phone call from a retired records supervisor. The woman sounded nervous, almost frightened. "There are files you haven't found yet," she said. Marsh immediately grabbed a notebook. "What kind of files?" The answer changed everything. According to the former supervisor, several complaint investigations had never officially entered department databases. They existed only in physical storage, locked away, forgotten, or perhaps hidden. When the call ended, Marsh sat silently for several moments. Then she contacted Chief Aldridge. Because if those files contained what she suspected, the scandal threatening Sycamore Falls was no longer a departmental crisis. It was becoming a criminal investigation. The forgotten files were stored in the basement of an old municipal records building on the edge of town. Dust covered the shelves. Boxes sat untouched for years. Most people assumed everything important had already been digitized. Most people were wrong. Carolyn Marsh arrived early the next morning, accompanied by 2 investigators and a city attorney. The retired records supervisor met them at the entrance. She looked nervous, almost guilty. "I should have spoken sooner," she admitted. Marsh nodded. "Just show us where they are." The woman led them through narrow aisles lined with aging cardboard boxes. Eventually she stopped. "These." There were dozens, far more than Marsh expected. Several were labeled with complaint numbers that never appeared in department databases. Others contained no labels at all. The investigators immediately began cataloging everything. Within 2 hours, a troubling pattern emerged. Many complaints involved the same small group of officers. One name appeared repeatedly. Brent Callahan. Another appeared almost as often. Dale Morrison. Marsh carefully reviewed file after file. A college student detained without explanation. A military veteran searched during a routine traffic stop. A small business owner accused of suspicious behavior while entering his own office building. Each complaint followed a familiar path. Citizen reports misconduct. Internal review occurs. No violation found. Case closed. Yet the supporting evidence told a different story. Witness statements disappeared. Video footage went missing. Recommendations for discipline were altered or removed. Someone had not merely ignored problems, someone had actively protected them. By noon, Marsh contacted state investigators. This was no longer an internal matter. Meanwhile, news of the expanding investigation reached Marcus Whitaker. He sat quietly in chambers, reviewing legal briefs when Danielle entered, carrying a folder. "You need to see this," she said. Inside were transcripts from recent city council hearings. Residents had come forward in large numbers. Teachers, nurses, retirees, construction workers, people who had never met one another. Yet their stories sounded remarkably similar. Marcus read every page. By the end, he removed his glasses and stared silently through the office window. The situation was becoming bigger than either of them imagined. For years, these voices existed separately. Now they were being heard together. That collective truth carried enormous power. Across town, Chief Aldridge faced increasing pressure. Federal officials requested documentation. State authorities demanded cooperation. City council members asked difficult questions during public meetings. For the first time in decades, the department's decisions were being examined by people outside the department. Aldridge welcomed it. Painful as it was, sunlight revealed what darkness concealed. Late that afternoon, Marsh received laboratory confirmation regarding archived evidence. Several complaint files contained preserved digital records. Emails, internal messages, draft reports. The findings were devastating. In multiple cases, supervisors had discussed minimizing investigations before reviews even began. Some messages suggested outcomes had been decided in advance. Objectivity never had a chance. Marsh immediately forwarded the material to prosecutors. Criminal exposure was becoming a real possibility. That evening, a special city council session filled the high school auditorium. More than 1,000 residents attended. Many stood outside watching giant projection screens. Pastor Leonard Brooks addressed the crowd. "Accountability isn't revenge," he said. "Accountability is how communities heal." The audience responded with sustained applause. Then something unexpected happened. Marcus Whitaker approached the podium. The room fell silent. He looked across the crowd, people of every age, every background, every political belief, united by one concern: trust. "This story was never supposed to become national news," Marcus said. His voice remained calm, measured. "The real story belongs to people whose experiences were ignored long before mine." Many in the audience nodded, some wiped away tears. Marcus continued, "Justice is not measured by how institutions treat powerful people. Justice is measured by how they treat ordinary people when nobody is watching." The auditorium erupted in applause. But while residents focused on the speech, investigators were reviewing one final collection of records discovered in storage. And hidden within those documents was evidence linking multiple officials to decisions that extended far beyond the police department itself. The scandal was no longer stopping at Sycamore Falls. It was beginning to reach city leadership. The following week transformed Sycamore Falls in ways few residents thought possible. State investigators arrived. Federal attorneys arrived. Independent auditors arrived. For years, important decisions had been made behind closed doors. Now every document, email, and report seemed destined for public examination. City Hall became the center of attention. Council members faced difficult questions. Department heads reviewed years of records. Reporters waited outside meetings from morning until night. Nobody could predict where the investigation would ultimately lead. What began with a single traffic stop had become a reckoning. Carolyn Marsh spent most of her days reviewing evidence with prosecutors. The deeper they looked, the clearer the picture became. The problem had never been one officer, nor one supervisor. The real problem was a culture that rewarded silence. Employees who raised concerns found themselves isolated. Employees who avoided difficult questions advanced comfortably. Over time, accountability became optional. That discovery hurt more than any individual act of misconduct. Systems were supposed to prevent failures. Instead, this one had protected them. Meanwhile, Brent Callahan lived under a cloud of uncertainty. His termination was already public. Civil lawsuits were moving forward. Investigators had interviewed former colleagues. Former friends stopped returning calls. For the first time in his adult life, he was forced to confront consequences he could not control. One afternoon, he sat alone on the porch of his small rental home outside Richmond. The television inside replayed coverage of the investigation. Callahan muted the sound. He no longer needed commentators to explain what had happened. Deep down, he already knew. The assumptions he carried for years had shaped his decisions. Those decisions had finally caught up with him. Across Virginia, Marcus Whitaker continued hearing cases, yet his evenings became increasingly occupied by community forums, educational events, and conversations with residents. People approached him everywhere: grocery stores, restaurants, parking lots, churches. Many simply wanted to share their experiences. Others wanted reassurance that change remained possible. Marcus listened more than he spoke. The stories affected him deeply, not because they were unfamiliar, because there were so many. One evening, after a public forum in Richmond, an elderly man approached him. The man wore a faded military jacket decorated with service pins. "I've waited 30 years to tell somebody this," he said. Then he shared a story he had never reported. When he finished, Marcus shook his hand. Neither man spoke for several moments. Some wounds lasted decades. The next major development arrived unexpectedly. State prosecutors announced formal charges against several former officials connected to evidence manipulation and obstruction of investigations. The announcement stunned the region. Many people expected disciplinary actions. Few expected criminal charges. The message was unmistakable. The era of quiet cover-ups was ending. That same day, Sycamore Falls established its first independent civilian oversight board. Applications poured in from across the community. Teachers volunteered, veterans volunteered, business leaders volunteered, college professors volunteered. For the first time, ordinary residents would help review complaints and policy decisions. The process would not be perfect. Nothing involving human beings ever was. But it represented progress, real progress. Late one evening, Marcus and Danielle walked through their neighborhood together. The weather had finally turned beautiful. Summer flowers lined sidewalks. Children played basketball in nearby driveways. The same streets that once held flashing police lights now felt peaceful again. As they approached the intersection where everything began, both slowed. Neither needed to say why. The memories remained vivid. The rain, the commands, the handcuffs, the humiliation. Danielle squeezed Marcus's hand. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked toward the fading sunset, then toward the community center where residents were gathering for another public meeting. "Ask me in 10 years, he said, because real change could not be measured in headlines. It could only be measured by what happened afterward, and the true test of Sycamore Falls was still waiting ahead. 10 years later was still a long way off, but change arrived faster than many expected. The months following the investigation reshaped Sycamore Falls more profoundly than any election, development project, or budget proposal ever had. Policies changed. Leadership changed. Most importantly, expectations changed. People who once believed their complaints would disappear into filing cabinets began showing up at public meetings. Citizens who rarely participated in local government started asking questions. Transparency became something residents demanded rather than hoped for, and slowly the culture of silence began losing its grip. The Civilian Oversight Board issued its first annual report 8 months after its creation. The findings were uncomfortable. Several complaints previously dismissed had merit. Training deficiencies existed throughout multiple departments. Supervisory accountability required significant improvement. Yet, unlike earlier reports, these findings were released publicly. Nothing was hidden, nothing was buried. For many residents, that alone felt revolutionary. Officer Emma Sutton became one of the strongest advocates for reform. Her willingness to acknowledge her own mistakes earned respect from unexpected places. Community leaders trusted her. Young officers listened to her. Police academies invited her to speak about intervention, ethics, and professional courage. Whenever she addressed new recruits, she repeated the same lesson. The hardest decision isn't speaking when everyone agrees with you. The hardest decision is speaking when nobody does. The words carried weight because she had lived them. Meanwhile, Dale Morrison retired earlier than planned. His career never fully recovered. He spent years reflecting on the moments when leadership required action, and he chose comfort instead. Some consequences arrived in courtrooms. Others arrived in quiet moments of personal reflection. Often the second kind lasted longer, As for Brent Callahan, the future he once imagined disappeared completely. His badge was gone, his authority was gone. The certainty that had guided him for years vanished as well. History would remember him not for arrests or commendations. It would remember him as the officer whose assumptions exposed a broken system. That reality followed him everywhere. Marcus Whitaker never sought public attention. Yet his experience became part of legal seminars, university discussions, and professional training programs across the country. Not because he was famous, because the story illustrated an uncomfortable truth. Institutions are only as strong as the people willing to protect their principles. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the traffic stop, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at a law school in Virginia. Students filled every seat, professors lined the walls, future attorneys listened carefully. Near the end of his speech, a student raised her hand. "Judge Whitaker," she asked, "after everything that happened, do you still believe in the system?" The room became silent. Marcus smiled gently. It was the question everyone wanted answered. He thought for a moment before speaking. "I believe in what the system is supposed to be." The audience listened closely. "And I believe it's our responsibility to make sure it becomes that every day." No dramatic applause followed immediately. People were thinking, reflecting, understanding, because justice was never a destination. It was a commitment, a choice repeated again and again. Back in Sycamore Falls, the intersection of Willow Creek Drive looked exactly the same as it always had. Cars passed, children rode bicycles, neighbors walked their dogs. Visitors would never know something significant happened there. But the community remembered. The lesson remained. One assumption led to humiliation. One act of courage exposed the truth. One demand for accountability sparked lasting reform. The story was never really about a judge. It was about responsibility, about dignity, about ordinary people deciding that silence was no longer acceptable. And perhaps that is why the story endured. Not because a powerful man was treated unfairly, but because his experience forced an entire community to confront how others had been treated for years. The road toward justice remained imperfect. It always would. Yet Sycamore Falls had taken its first meaningful steps forward. Sometimes change begins with outrage. Sometimes it begins with courage. And sometimes it begins with a single person refusing to look away. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.